Oh boy, I never thought a day would come where my close relationship with my dad would be one of the biggest regrets in my life. My name is Kristen, and I'm a 28-year-old female in case you all are wonderful, lol. I'm also an accountant and I'm very passionate about my job. That's why it really hurts me right now that my life is practically falling apart. Currently, my whole career is at stake because of the mistake I made. I cheated on my husband and he decided to ruin my career for me. My husband's name is Fred, and he is 31 years male. My husband and I have been married for 3 years. Right now, I'm at the verge of losing both my husband and career. Things have really not been the same since Fred chased me out of the house. I really miss my husband and I'm trying my best to get back with him. My affair was a mistake that I regretted doing. I know it will sound stupid to you guys if I say that my infidelity was not intentional. Well, it isn't because I didn't plan on cheating on a man who did nothing but showed me love and cared for me. Fred never did anything to me that made me stop loving him. To be honest, there's not much I can use to fault Fred at all. At some point I wanted to open up to my husband about it, but I couldn't. I thought of how he would react knowing that I had an affair with someone else. I couldn't stand up to him. The guilt was eating me up and I wanted to tell someone about it. The burden was just too much for me to bear. I wanted to pour it all out to somebody. Someone I trusted and wouldn't judge me. The only person I could think of aside from my husband was my dad. I had friends, but I didn't trust them that much to tell them. My dad and I are really close. Our relationship is more than just the typical strict father and timid daughter. My dad is literally my best friend and the only parent and family I have. Yes, I have a mother, but we aren't as close as I am with my dad. Growing up, I shared important things about myself to my dad because my mom was never around. My mom was a career-oriented woman who hardly had time for herself, not to talk of her family. But Dad was there for me when I needed a mother figure. Trust me, my dad fitted in so perfectly. He played both parties, and he did an amazing job. When I told my dad about my affair, he didn't take it lightly with me. I have never seen my dad so angry the way he did when I told him about my infidelity. From the look on his face that day, I could tell that he was disappointed in me. For the first time ever, I let my dad down, and I'm not proud of it. But that didn't stop him from talking to me. Yes, he was mad at me for what I did. My dad was never in support of cheating, no matter how little it was. After opening up to him that day, he told me to tell my husband about it. When I told him I couldn't, he told me to accept anything that comes out of it. At that time, I didn't have the courage to face Fred, even though my dad had encouraged me to open up to him. Fred overheard our conversation and acted normal. I thought letting my dad know would ease my burden, but it didn't. Things got out of control that day, and for the first time in my life, I regret confiding in my dad. If I had kept the secret to myself, no one would know about it, let alone Fred, who overheard our conversation. My husband is trying everything possible to push me away from him. He made it clear that he doesn't want to have anything to do with me or even want to get close to me. My dad has pleaded with him and even talked to him to forgive me, but Fred is just so difficult to deal with. My husband and dad were very close before this happened, and now, because of me, my husband doesn't respect my dad like he used to. Fred couldn't even wait to hear my dad out when he took me along to apologize to him. The atom of disrespect we faced that day made me regret ever taking my dad to beg Fred. Overnight, my husband seemed to have forgotten about me and what we shared together. He didn't even want to hear anything from me. Fred just concluded that I cheated and doesn't want to give me a chance to make up for what I did. Guys, don't we deserve a second chance if we did something bad? Or is my own crime too big to be forgiven? At this point, I'm so confused. I don't even know what to do to make Fred change his mind about his decision to divorce me. Fred and I are currently going through the divorce process, and with the way things are going, I don't think I would get anything meaningful from the divorce. It's not over yet, but let's see as it goes. I really do not want to divorce my husband, but if this is what would make him happy, then so be it. I cried and begged him. I even went to the extent of involving our parents to plead with him, but Fred is just too stubborn. The look on my husband's face any time he sees me at the court is so scary. I never imagined that my husband and I would get to a point where we would seek a divorce and go our separate ways. All of this is happening right now because of my stupid mistake. All this is happening now because I came in contact with a total stranger at a musical concert one fateful day. That day, if I had known what the outcome would be, I wouldn't have stepped out. My friends and I loved spending time together every weekend. That was the only time we had the chance to meet together because we spent our weekdays at the office. My circle of friends are not the lazy types and not full-time housewives. We try to go out and work to earn a living, even though our husbands are capable of taking care of our needs and the household bills. So guys, that fateful weekend, my friends and I planned on going to a musical concert together after weeks of being away from each other. The tickets were bought a month before the event because we didn't want to miss out on anything. Of course, it was our favorite musical band that was playing that day. Just so that I wouldn't miss it, and also I didn't want to keep the ladies waiting. I got back from work early. By the time we got there, everywhere had gotten filled up, even though we tried going there early. Everywhere was really choked up, and I couldn't find a place to watch our favorite band play. After a few minutes of looking around, going from one spot to another, we managed to find somewhere to stay. It wasn't what we had wanted or planned, but we were happy we had a spot. We were upstage viewing everyone from up. It wasn't as filled as those that were down. The people up were just a few. It was somehow manageable. My friends and I got drinks to chill for the night. When it was time for our band to play, my friends and I got really excited. We yelled so loud that everyone started looking at us like we were drunk. It was a very fun night, and I had the best time with my friends. When the show was over, we got ready to leave. Just on our way out, a young guy walked up to us. I won't lie, guys. The guy was looking so handsome and was well dressed. He said hi to us and introduced himself as Sam. My friends and I also did the same. Without wasting time at that moment, Sam went straight to say he wanted to have a quick chat with me. I was confused as to why it was me he wanted to talk to amongst my friends. Funnily enough, he even requested that we talk in private. I turned him down immediately, but my friends gave me the look to give him a chance to hear what he had to say. I was so exhausted that night that I didn't want to spend any more seconds at that place, but I just had to spare a few minutes to hear Sam out. Honestly, I was also curious to know what he wanted to say, just that I was too exhausted. So Sam and I went over to a place somewhere not too far from my friends, so they would see me in case Sam tried anything funny because we were just meeting for the first time. The first few minutes Sam and I stood together was really awkward. We were both shy at first. At that moment, I was really anxious and didn't know why. We talked about the show and chatted about a few things. I discovered that Sam and I loved the same musical band. Guys, it felt like we had known ourselves for long because of how fast we connected with each other at that moment. I couldn't believe I ignored Sam initially when he asked for us to talk in private. I didn't know why. Maybe it was because I was exhausted at that moment and couldn't wait to get back home. After a few minutes of chatting and laughing together, Sam and I exchanged contacts. He then promised to give me a call when he got home. After we were done, we went back to where my friends stood waiting for me. Sam bid us goodbye, and he got into his car and drove off. Immediately he left, my friends were impatient to know what we had discussed that got me laughing the way I did. I told them it wasn't anything too serious, that we just talked about the show and nothing else. My friends teased me about it and told me how good-looking Sam was. I reminded them that I was still married, should they have forgotten. For the rest of the night, my friends kept teasing me about it. Truly, Sam was good-looking, there was no doubt about that. At that time, it felt like I was falling in love again, even though I was married to my husband. So, when I got back home that day, I went straight to bed. I was extremely exhausted from doing anything that night. Even though Sam and I promised to call each other that night, I couldn't stay up to fulfill the promise. The next day, I woke up to see Sam's call and a text message from him. He had messaged to know if I had gotten home safely. Immediately, I sent him a thumbs up and promised to call back any time I was less busy. I couldn't talk to him at that moment because my husband and I wanted to go for a morning walk. Sam at that time had no idea that I was married. We weren't that close enough to tell him that at that time. A few days later, I thought of giving Sam a call. We didn't chat with each other after that text message I sent to him. I was at work when I called him. We talked for a few minutes and then ended the call and went about our day. About a week later, Sam gave me a call. My chat with Sam was on and off. We were both busy with work. When Sam called, he told me he wanted us to hang out together at any place I would be comfortable to talk. I gave him the address, and we met after I closed from work that day. We met at a restaurant, a private lounge to be precise. I didn't want to bump into anyone I knew back then, most especially Fred's friends, because they would get the wrong impression of me and Sam together at a restaurant. Sam and I spent a nice time together at the restaurant, by the way. Sam really knows how to make jokes a lot. The few times I spent with him was full of laughter. It got to a point my cheeks get swollen because of how funny Sam was anytime we were together. After we were done from the restaurant, we went somewhere relaxing. There, a lot of things were going on, like country music playing and fun activities. It was getting dark, but it felt like it was still daytime. The people in the neighborhood seemed excited and free. In my years of living in the town, I never thought somewhere like that existed. Sam was the person that took me there. I went to a lot of amazing places with Sam. We did sightseeing together and hiking. I spent most of my weekends with Sam. At that time, spending time with my friends was limited. They complained about me not spending time with them like I used to, but they had no idea that I was going out with Sam. I use work as an excuse just to cover up, and so guys, my friendship with Sam got stronger. At that time, we were just friends hanging out together and making fun memories. We had nothing going on aside from that. Sam was a businessman, and so he was not always in town. But the few times he was around, we made memories together. Sam always joked about taking me on one of his business trips. I didn't think much about it because I knew how he joked about almost everything. But he was serious the day he told me he wanted me to come along with him to seal a business deal. At that moment, I didn't know whether to accept or not because I was confused and at the same time scared. My relationship with Sam at that time was just a few months old. I didn't trust him that much to go with him to somewhere that far away. I couldn't tell my dad about it. For some reason, I kept my friendship with Sam from my dad. When I got married, I limited the things I told my dad about myself. Maybe if I had told him about it, he wouldn't have let things get out of hand like this. My dad would have literally called me to order and probably give me prep talk like he usually does. It took me about a week before I accepted Sam's request for the trip. All I needed for that trip was just my luggage and nothing else. Sam told me not to bother about any expenses. The day we were to leave town, my husband was at home. I came up with a lie that I was going on a trip with my friends, which he didn't bother to ask because he was used to seeing me going on a trip with them. My husband had no issue with them. In fact, my friends came around any time they wanted. With the way my friends had access to my home, it would have been so easy for Fred to cheat on me with one of them, if not all, but he didn't. He respected our relationship and was faithful. I broke the vow we made to each other. Sometimes I feel like my husband's anger is justified, but then again, he really went too far to have his revenge. I really wish I could go back in time and rewrite everything I did wrong in my life so far. My friendship with Sam was a chapter I keep wishing I didn't open. It didn't just cost me my marriage, but my career and entire life. Nothing seemed to be the same after that. So guys, the day Sam and I were to take off was on a Saturday morning. It was an early morning flight. My husband wanted to drop me off at the airport, but I refused immediately. Fred was confused as to why I turned the offer down because I always loved him to drop me off anytime I was going on a trip with my friends. Of course I wasn't going with my friends, it was just an excuse. If I had allowed him to take me to the airport himself, he would have suspected something was fishy. I had no flight tickets with me. Everything was with Sam, and I was only required to come with my luggage. And also, Sam and I planned on meeting to go to the airport together. At that moment, I convinced my husband that I would be able to go by myself. I also assured him that I would be fine and would let him know if I needed anything. After much persuasion, he agreed to stay back. It's not so easy to convince my husband not to do something he had decided to do. Fred hardly takes no for an answer, most especially when he's doing something for me. Fred really loved me that much. I left that morning with a cab to meet Sam at the place we planned to meet before going to the airport. We got to the airport, and in less than 3 hours, we took off. The flight was great, and everything went well. When we arrived at our destination, we headed over to the nearest hotel to lodge. The one we could get had only one room available. It was late at that time, so we couldn't go out looking for hotels that had 2 vacant rooms. To top it up, Sam and I were both tired from the journey. We got to the room, and we settled down immediately. Of course, I was a bit uncomfortable staying in a room with Sam, who was not my husband. I was restless, but had no choice. The next day, Sam took me to a lot of amazing places. It was my first time visiting there, and Sam knew the place more than I did, because he had been to that place several times. It was a nice city, guys. I keep wishing to go back there again. Despite the sightseeing and having fun together, Sam didn't forget what brought us there. He had a lot of meetings with clients and was busy all through the day most times. Sometimes the meetings were not that tedious, and he rounded up early. Whenever Sam was in a meeting, I used that opportunity to take pictures just so I won't get bored. The trip lasted about a week, and I enjoyed every minute of the time spent. The night before we were to leave the city, Sam and I had so much to drink that day. We celebrated his win for sealing a contract in another way. I got so carried away without thinking about anything at that moment. All that was on my mind was to enjoy myself, which I did. I got so lost that I kissed Sam. That was all that I remembered. The next morning I found out that Sam and I had made out and gotten intimate. I couldn't believe it at that moment. I was so angry at myself because I didn't expect Sam and I to make out. The last thing I remembered was kissing him, and I'm not trying to blame it all on alcohol. Because what in the name was I doing with a man in the room in the first place? I thought to myself that what I did with Sam and the relationship we had was not really okay. I told myself that I shouldn't have agreed on the trip. Lying to my husband about where I was going was the biggest mistake I made. I wanted to make things right at that moment. I felt like leaving the hotel room and going back home, but I couldn't. I got out of the bed and went into the bathroom. After a few minutes, I was done, and by the time I came out, Sam had woken up. I told him we needed to hurry up so we could meet up, because I wanted to go back home that day and didn't want to miss the flight. I was annoyed at that moment and couldn't hide it. Sam came closer to me and asked me why I was being upset. He asked if everything was fine and also asked if it was because of what happened between us. I told him that I didn't want to talk about it and he shouldn't stress further, which he didn't. I was really upset with the whole thing that happened and didn't want to get more angry like I was. What I did was not to talk to Sam. I literally gave him the silent treatment all through the journey. By that time, the guilt was already getting to me. For some reason, Sam didn't feel what we had that night was a mistake. Maybe it was because he was not aware that I was married. Even though he knew, would he have still come closer to me? Because Sam really liked me at that time. When I got back home, my husband prepared for my arrival like he usually does anytime I went on a trip with my friends. Seeing all the efforts Fred put in doing all of that broke me hard. I lied to him about my trip with my friends, and to make matters worse, I cheated on him with another man. My husband welcomed me with nice takeouts and comfort food. I was the one who should be getting him gifts from wherever I was coming from, right? But no, I didn't. Instead, Fred got them for me. I was so happy at that moment after knowing how much Fred loved me. I wished what I had with Sam was just a nightmare. After some few hours, I settled down, and it felt like home again. The thought of being back home to a lovely husband was so nice. Fred wanted me to tell him all what happened on the trip like I used to do. He was interested to know about everything because he had heard my friends and I talking about going to that same city over time to have a good time together. Truly, my friends and I had added that same city to our bucket list. Just that I went there without a stranger and not them. I told Fred a few things about my trip and some exciting moments I had, and to back it up, I showed him some of the photos I took. So guys, a few days after the trip, I went back to my normal activities. Sam and I didn't chat after that trip. He kept calling and texting me, but I didn't respond to any of that. At that moment, I regretted what I did and thought of a way to end it all. Sam, on the other hand, never opened up to me that he liked me, and so it was easier for me to put an end to it. The only option I thought was the best to choose at that moment was to ghost Sam, which I did. He never stopped calling or texting me. At some point, I blocked him on my contact list because it got me annoyed. I wanted to forget about everything that happened. But it wasn't working. I even thought of telling my friends about my relationship with Sam, but didn't know how they would take it. They never advised me to cheat on my husband. I had the choice whether to do it or not. At that moment, I had no other person to open up to but my dad. My dad and I talked about lots of things during the time Sam and I got really close together, but I didn't say a word about Sam to him because I didn't know how he would react to it at that time. After everything got out of my control, I decided to talk to my dad. I knew that I would get a solution after talking with him about anything that gave me issues. A month after I got back from the trip, I called my dad and told him I had wanted to see him because it was very urgent. He was surprised to hear me say that and asked if everything was fine. I told him nothing was fine and that I needed to speak with him because it seemed like I was losing my mind. On hearing that, my dad agreed to come see me the next day, which was on a Saturday. I was a bit relieved that my dad was coming over to see me. I kept wondering how he would react after letting him know about what I did. So, the day my dad came over, my husband and I were watching a movie together. Fred was aware about my dad's coming. My parents didn't live far away from where we lived. It was just a few streets from our neighborhood, but they gave us our privacy. When my dad came, I was very excited to see him. We hugged for a while, and then I served him something to eat. Fred and my dad kept talking about work and lots of random stuff. At that moment, I was impatient for them to finish up whatever they were discussing because I wanted to speak with my dad, but they didn't stop talking. In the middle of their conversation, I had to cut them short and told my husband that I wanted to speak with Dad for a few minutes. My husband agreed and he said I could go on, but I told him I needed to speak with him in private for a few minutes. Fred was confused and didn't understand what was so important that I couldn't say it in his presence. My dad also told me to say it, but I didn't, and pulled him over to the guest room. At that point, my dad already felt that I had done something crazy because I acted that way anytime I was restless. He asked what was eating me up so much that I couldn't say in front of my husband. I asked him not to go hard on me if I told him what I had in mind. My dad was already impatient to hear what it was, so he agreed. I told my dad that I cheated on my husband with a stranger I had met at a musical concert 6 months ago. The moment the words left my mouth, my dad's face turned pale. He wasn't expecting to hear that from me. My dad asked me to repeat what I told him that he might have not heard me clearly. I repeated what I said in a very low tone with my head buried on the ground. At that moment, my dad got angry. He asked me what got into me that made me cheat on my husband. It was then I told him everything that happened and how Sam and I met. I also made him know at that moment that I had cut all ties with Sam and weren't in contact any longer. My dad got very annoyed with me. He told me what I did was wrong and asked me to tell my husband about it. Immediately, I told him that I couldn't because I didn't know how he would take it after hearing that. My dad told me that I would definitely have to find a way to let Fred know because he wouldn't be part of lying to him. My dad scolded me very harshly that day. I knew what I did was wrong but didn't know how to open up to my husband. My dad advised me never to try what I did ever again. He told me that my husband would be angry with me when he learnt about it, but I should be the one to tell him everything before he gets to know about it from another source. That day, my conversation with my dad didn't go as planned. For the first time in how many years, my dad was very annoyed with me because of what I did. He even told me he was not going to speak with me until I had told my husband about it. I didn't believe my dad could say that to me. Of course, I didn't expect him to praise or pet me for what I did, but it wasn't the kind of reaction I had expected. All the time my dad and I were having that conversation, I had no idea that my husband was there listening to everything we had discussed. He acted like he didn't hear anything that day. We even met my husband at the same position we had left him. I didn't know that he was planning how to take his revenge on me at that moment. 5 weeks later, my dad called to know if I had told my husband about it, but I hadn't told him. My dad asked what was stopping me from telling him. I just told him I needed some time to do that. At that time, I was caught up with work. We had a conference meeting at the office, and I was part of the organizing committee. I made up my mind to tell Fred about it after the meeting, but I didn't know what was coming for me. On that day, something embarrassing happened to me. We were at the meeting deliberating on an important issue when a familiar face walked into the hall. It was no other person but Sam. Yes, Sam. I was shocked to see him there. The meeting was interrupted by Sam's presence, and everyone stopped whatever they were doing at that moment and stared at Sam. It was so embarrassing to watch. Sam introduced himself and brought out his phone from his pocket. He read a message from his phone and said he was asked to come to this hall at that particular hour, and he read the sender's name aloud, which turned out to be me. Guys, the message was sent to him through my phone, and I didn't know who had sent it. I was just as confused as everyone present that day. Immediately, my boss turned to me and asked me what was going on. I stood up angrily and told Sam to leave because I didn't remember texting him to meet me at my workplace or even in the conference meeting. Sam ignored what I said and asked me why I ghosted him after everything we had shared together. He told me in the presence of everyone that he missed me and would want us to be together. Before I could say anything further, my husband walked in, clapping his hands so loud. At that moment, I knew that I was in big trouble. I didn't know how my husband found out about my secret affair. Fred walked up to me and told me how proud he was to know that his wife knew how to play mind games so well. He also said he was impressed that I had the effrontery to cheat on him and even lie to him just so I could go on a trip with my affair partner. At that point, I didn't know what to say. I stuttered and lacked words at that moment. My husband had a piece of paper with him. It turned out to be divorce papers, and he threw them at me. He told me it was over between us and didn't want to ever see me in his life again, and he left. The meeting was adjourned because of what happened, and they had to call in security to defuse the situation. My boss then asked me to meet him at his office with an angry face. Sam was escorted out by the security, and he complied. He was surprised to know that I was married and kept it away from him. I was so embarrassed that day that I didn't know how to hide my face. At that moment, I was left with two options, either to run after my husband or to go after my boss. I wasn't even in my right frame of mind to think about anything. I quickly went over to my boss's office. My boss was angry with me because of my misconduct. He told me to evacuate the premises with immediate effect and that he would put me on suspension indefinitely. My boss wasn't interested in whatever I had to say because he believed if he was lenient with me, then others would do the same thing. I discovered that there was nothing I could do to change his mind at that moment, so I went back home to plead with my husband. But when I got home, I saw my luggages packed outside. Fred locked the door and left home. I waited for him to return that day, but he didn't. I was stranded outside, and I even spent the night outside. The next day, he was still not back, and that's how I ended up back in my father's house. Update. 13 months later, and I am here with an update. None of the advice from here was able to save my marriage. Honestly speaking, you all only lashed out. No one actually tried to help me. My marriage with Fred ended, and I got nothing from the divorce. Even though I involved my parents to plead with him, my husband stood his ground to divorce me. Guys, that day my dad and I had that conversation, my husband planned on dealing with me. It was my husband that used my phone to message Sam. Even though I had blocked Sam from messaging or calling me, Fred went through my phone and found Sam's number under the blocked list. He overheard me telling my dad that I had blocked Sam and he didn't waste time going through it. My husband knew how important that meeting was, and he thought of a way to ruin it. He knew my job would be at stake if I was involved in any misconduct. My husband successfully accomplished his mission by making me lose my job and embarrassing me. Yes, guys, the company sent me an email of not needing my services any longer. I worked so hard to get that job, and Fred knew how important it was to me. My boss just used what happened as an excuse to fire me, because I don't see what's the big deal in what happened. The highest he could have done is to suspend me. Fred, on the other hand, made sure to leave me nothing before divorcing me. His plans worked so perfectly that I lost my job and marriage all at once. He even made sure that my affair partner left me and blocked me just like I did to him. I honestly didn't see it coming at all. I tried talking to my boss to have mercy on me and give me back my job, but he didn't listen to me. My friends have concluded that my boss must have something against me, but that's his business. He even called the security on me and gave them strict warning never to allow me to come any closer to the office. I love that job very much. I put in all my hard work to keep it. I had that job before Fred and I got married. It was one of the most important things in my life, and now Fred has successfully taken that away from me. If there's anything I hate the most, that would be applying for jobs.